Hello everyone. Before we dive into this new sort of video I'm trying out, I just want to give you a little peek behind the curtain before you just jump right into the pool. Consider this a dipping your toes in before I just throw you right in. Because after I've edited that video, I turned back around and I can admit that it's pretty rough, but it is a first step. And you may be asking yourself, well, if it's kind of rough, why put out the video? Well, for two reasons. One, you guys gave some really good replies and I didn't want those to go to waste, so of course those will be retained and are still in this video. And two, because you gotta start somewhere. That's the thing with content creation. It's a journey. You're not gonna be exactly where you wanna be when you first start out. And I'd like to think that a year from now I can look back at this and be like, wow, I've really grown since then. So that's why I'm going to continue to put this out, and definitely will tweak it for the next time we do one of these types of videos. The idea with this series is that it's more audio based rather than something like the video essays where the video actually is directly correlating to what the script in the video essay is. Like on here, it's just raw gameplay. Most of the time it will be at least somewhat relevant. Like for this video, we were talking about Redfall in 30 frames per second. There's going to be a game that plays at a very unstable frame rate and some arcane titles in the background. But that's not really the point. The point is the conversation. The conversation that I have with myself, talking to the mic, because that's what it is, and the conversation I have with you guys as the comments from the post. That's what the main drive of this is. More so the conversation than what's actually being displayed. So you kind of just put this video on in the background while you're playing your games, grinding your multiplayer achievements, getting new gear, whatever it is you're doing in your games. You just pop this on in the background and give it a little listen. That's the idea, at least. But now with that disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and roll this video. Welcome to TalkAbout, the show where I talk about whatever it is I feel like talking about, whether it's the hottest gaming news or just any random thing that comes to mind. Beyond this intro and the outro, this is completely unscripted content. The idea being that there's less production behind it, meaning that these can be more frequent than the video essays I do here, and, well, it's just more conversational that way. The only way to make this more of a conversation, though, is with you. Keep an eye out for the occasional post here on the channel so that your voice may be heard on the next TalkAbout, and the best way to see these posts is by subscribing to the channel, and so that we can get even more like-minded player voices heard in these, be sure to hit the like button and share this video to everyone you know to boost that algorithm and get this video out to those who need to see it. I appreciate that so very much. But today, I just wanted to talk about the whole 30 frames per second conundrum going on with Redfall. And I'll be honest with you, this news came out about a week ago, but if you have been keeping up to date with my Twitter, you'll know that I've recently gotten addicted to Breath of the Wild for the first time. It finally was able to capture my entire being, and so that's really just been, as much fun as it is, it's really just been tanking my productivity. So I apologize for that, and I also apologize for that in the video essay, which is making great progress. I just recorded that yesterday, so I just need to edit that. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Redfall and this whole 30 frames per second only on Xbox consoles, at least. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that because when that news came out, the internet was furious. Like, you would have thought that Arcane announced that they completely canceled production on the game or something a week before launch. No, not at all what happened. Just the fact that the game's locked to 30 frames per second on Xbox. Which, yeah, I mean, it's a bummer considering we are firmly in the next generation of consoles. You would hope and expect games to have 60 frames per second. Most games have it, let alone first-party games, because Bethesda is now a first-party studio for Xbox, so it's a little bizarre that that is the case. And a lot of people were calling for a delay, but considering we are 3 weeks out from Redfall's release, I just don't see that happening. So the question I pose to you guys, which is what I will also be answering myself, is Is 30 frames per second a deal breaker for you in gaming in the year 2023? And my answer to that is no. 30 frames per second is not a deal breaker for me, which is something that I didn't expect myself to say, quite honestly, because when this new generation started, I thought 60 frames per second was the only way to play games. Or once you've experienced 30 for so long, going from the Xbox One generation to going to 60 frames per second with the Series X, it just changed my life, and I thought that I could never go back. But when I got a Series X, I also upgraded my TV from a 1080p piece of garbage, tiny little thing, to a 55-inch 4K TV. Not an OLED yet, because I don't make that much money in my day job. It's a miracle that I was able to get this TV. It's a Vizio, and Vizios are cheap, so it is what it is. But it's 4K, and it's pretty big in my room, and that's all that matters, and it's really cool. But where was I going with that? But the point is that my TV is 4K, and so I sometimes want to play games in 4K. So I was like, let's see what the quality mode looks like, just to see what it looks like, just to check it out. And then I press quality mode, frames drop, and then I'm like, it does not feel nearly as good to play. But then you just get used to it. Like after 5-10 minutes, 30 frames just feels normal. And with certain modes on TVs, you can make 30 frames feel like more than 30. They can smooth things out to make it not feel as slow. Slow's not the word I'm looking for. What's the word? Framey? Not really framey. It's just there are settings on TVs that can help smooth things out and make it feel smoother, even if it's only at 30 frames. There are times where I would prefer to have the quality mode. Like with Resident Evil 4, I've been playing recently. I have that on quality mode because I am playing it on a big TV and I would like to see it in high quality, Get all the pixels, get that ray tracing going, because that's also a trade-off that is unfortunate that we have to deal with on consoles. You can only have ray tracing in quality mode. You can't have anything as fancy with 60 frames, which is a bummer. And, you really would have hoped that we'd figure that out, but I guess the technology is just not there quite yet. But yeah, I don't mind it. It's not a deal breaker for me. And then the follow-up question that I added to that is, what would your reaction be if Starfield is locked to 30 frames per second? Honestly, I still wouldn't care that much because, like I said, 30 frames per second, if that's all you have, you just get used to it. The only time the difference between 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second feels like something to me is when I go back and forth. Like once I'm playing at 30 is fine. Once I'm playing at 60 is fine. Then I go back to 30 feels bad at first, but it eventually feels fine. So I just don't understand the outrage, honestly. But I definitely could see the outrage that we saw for Redfall being 30 frames per second would be amplified by about 10 times if Starfield is locked to 30. Which does beg the question of what is keeping these games from running at 60? Because me knowing very little about how game development works, I would just think that it's as simple as lowering things like texture quality, or like shadow quality, that sort of thing. It makes me wonder why console games don't have the same sort of settings as PC games, where you can go into the settings and pick your resolution, pick your frame rate, uncapped frame rate. Like, it would make so much sense to me if the frame rate is just uncapped, but you can set shadow detail, anti-aliasing, all of the things that people talk about when they play PC games. Why can't consoles have that? Is there an actual reason for that? Because I feel like in this day and age, it's only a good thing having more chances to customize your experience to the way you like. If you want high quality textures, you're going to take a frame rate hit. But if you want the frames, you can lower all those settings to get up to like 120 frames like the box says. But I don't know. Let's see what you guys had to say about all of this though, because I've been talking for I don't know how long now, 9 minutes. I don't know if that's going to make the whole cut, but let's turn the spotlight to you all out there who wrote in with your thoughts on the 30 frames per second debacle and whether or not it's a deal breaker for you. And I do have to apologize if I mispronounce your username. Also, for future reference, if you would prefer to go by your actual human name rather than your YouTube username, feel free to leave, what your name is. But yeah, anyways, let's see what the first write-in we had was. Buki writes in, just like you can, and says, for me, it really depends on the kind of game. For a fast-paced genre like a first-person shooter or hack and slash, 60 frames per second or more really enhances the experience. But if it's a slower game like an open world or an RPG, I don't really mind 30 frames per second, which I can get behind because, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because if in a first-person shooter or a hack and slash, it's faster paced and it just feels better to play at 60 frames because it keeps up with the action more. And then with an open world game or an RPG, where you're kind of, methodically taking your time, checking out the sights, seeing the spectacle of it all, you don't really need that frame rate to catch up with all of that because there's not too much going on in terms of action. And then I asked Buki what they thought about the idea of Starfield being locked to 30 frames per second, and this is what they had to say. That's a good one, since Starfield seems to be a first-person shooter / RPG combination. In my opinion, as long as there is a heavy focus in real-time combat, 30 frames per second is not a deal breaker, but it does hinder the experience. 60 frames per second would put the game in a better light, at least for me. And that I completely 100% agree on. 30 frames per second, it's good. It's all right. But if that game, to have that sort of spectacle and the ambition to also be at 60 frames per second would just make it even better than I already imagine it to be. But, we won't know until September, which is very exciting. So close, but so far away. Let's keep it rolling. Kiwi V, I think I got that right. Kiwi V writes in and says, depends, as I play on PC. If I only got 30 frames per second, that would be rather disappointing and doubt there'd be good reasoning as my PC is fairly solid. But if it was 30 frames per second on consoles, then 50-50. If fidelity, then that's probably fine, as often that is the case for some of the more visual games. But if even performance was that low, then that's pretty questionable. But ultimately depends on how they make and code the game. Ultimately, Xboxes may be good value, but are limited, and at the rate of improvement in game visuals, the gap spreads faster and faster in what it can produce, and ultimately, you will always run into that issue sooner or later. So it just depends on how in-depth the game is and the quality. That's a fair assessment. Because yeah, like if a game is good, the performance isn't going to matter. At the end of the day, if the game is really good, it's not really going to matter if it's 30 frames or 60 frames because people are still going to just enjoy the game because it's a good game. If the frame rate, as long as it's stable, it should be fine. The frame rate being a stable 30 or a stable 60 makes the game a great game or a bad game to you, then I feel like you have further issues that you need to work out somewhere else. Thank you for that writing, Kiwi V. Smurth for the win writes in and says, I almost always play single-player games in fidelity mode, so for the most part, no. Which I agree with. I play a lot of my single-player games in fidelity mode because it just looks prettier. But they continued on and said, however, for a co-op first-person shooter like Redfall, that isn't even graphically demanding. It's inexcusable for it not to have a 60 frames per second performance mode at launch. I can definitely see why you would say that because, yeah, it doesn't look graphically intense whatsoever. It's in Arcane's usual style. It's not going for photorealism or anything like that. It's that classic Arcane style. But it's not like ray tracing. I don't even know what other words there are to use about quality. It's not like 4K ray tracing, all of that jazz. It's pretty standard Arcane stuff, and they have hit 60 frames per second before on their other games, so it is a little weird. That is a good point. It just seems so weird to me that it's not having 60 frames per second performance mode at launch. It's bizarre. Like, it's just weird to think about, quite honestly. like, I can see why people are upset. I feel like I've come full circle on this. Personally, frame rate isn't a deal breaker for me, but it's just weird. It's just weird that it's not happening, right? I guess that's what the whole point of this is, to just acknowledge how weird it is. We also have One-Eyed King of the Pacific Garbage Patch writes in and says, that's a unique username, by the way. My vision is so poor, I legit cannot tell the difference between 24 frames per second and 120. And I'm going to be honest with you, One-Eyed King of the Pacific Garbage Patch. I feel like you should check to see if your TV or monitor is capable of 120 frames, because the difference between 24 and 120, that is huge. So maybe make sure your monitor is capable of 120, and then compare like back and forth, side by side, whatever you need to do. Because I feel like, I don't know how poor your vision actually is, so maybe you really can't. But I just feel like it's such a big difference that you should be able to. I don't know. And last we have Vozora Dreams. I think I got that right one of those times. This is a long one. It's the last one. So let's dive in here, shall we? As someone who is on all platforms of gaming, PC and consoles, I wouldn't necessarily say 30 frames per second is a deal breaker. It really depends on how the game is. If it's something slow paced or even a turn-based game, I wouldn't mind playing it. Since we are in the next gen, there has been so much more graphics options for consoles, but I do hope it gets much more improved by providing options with your graphics, just like playing games on the PC. I know for console there are still limitations and can't exactly be like PC, but giving some options is better than none. Wow, I should go over these replies before I just hit record. I mentioned it earlier. Shout out to you, Vozora Dreams, for having that same wavelength as I. That's awesome. Pretty cool. And then they continue on to say, the last thing I want to mention about 30 frames per second being a deal breaker is that if you know that game can run 60 frames per second on that platform. If we saw Starfield only being offered to us in 30 frames per second, personally, it would be a big no to me. Especially since we are in the new generation of gaming, and I think 30 frames per second is a thing of the past. Higher frame rate to me is just so soothing to my eyes and helps avoid the problems of the past. Sorry if this comment is long. I think this topic is intriguing, especially how I used to game on console a lot, and the amount of times I always begged AAA developers for better performance than detailed graphics. It eventually physically affected me and my gaming experiences. I hope this comment brings some sort of insight. Looking forward to the video. Shout out to you for that extensive reply. I very much appreciated it. I did read it all, but of course I did cut out some of it so that it would flow better in the video. But you and I, same wavelength about having consoles have more options such as PCs, because it just makes sense, because we are in the next generation of video game consoles, and why can't they have those sort of options? Is there any reason for that? I don't know. But yeah, that's what I just wanted to talk about today. The whole 30 frames per second conundrum. I don't really know how to end this yet. As you all know, this is the first time I've done this type of video. So I'm still working out the kinks, but I knew I had to fast track it because, as we all know, news shifts so fast. So fast. And I have been playing so much Zelda that I just have been not paying attention to my content creation side. But hopefully I'll get it together. Thanks for watching this episode of TalkAbout, the show where I talk about whatever it is I want to talk about with you. Remember, the only way for you to be certain you see the posts posing the question for the next episode is by being subscribed. So if you aren't already, you know what to do. Until then, stay safe and play some video games. That's the outro I wrote, and this is still going because this is unscripted, so I can keep talking. But yeah, that's the outro, and between you and me, let me know what improvements could be made to this. Probably more structure. I thought it'd be fun to be more conversational about it, but maybe some structure would help with the flow of it overall. And maybe I should read all the comments before I go into it rather than reading them live as I hit the record button. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for stopping by. I already read the outro, so see you later, pals.